so I was, doing my typical browsing around in the off hours, and I came across a really interesting article, and it's about AI coding, as in you don't know how to code, you can just type words to this AI, and it will translate your words into code on the fly. So with that in mind, what do you guys think about that technology? Like, as it is, as it's going forward, do you see good things there? Do you see bad things that could come from that? Like, what are your thoughts in general?
So I guess I would need to understand how the technology works. So you're saying I don't know how to code, and I talk to something, and it writes the code for me. So do I talk to like what? How am I talking to it? Am I talking to it in like a flowchart language, like what I want a program to do from point A to Z, and like how it would interact with it? Or I guess I'm confused of how the technology works.
Even more basic than that, you are, for instance, they were showing for this article that I read, it was for like the application of making like a video game, and they're just saying like, hey, I want a picture of a rocket ship moving left to right while firing a laser, and this thing will program that to have a rocket ship on screen going back and forth left to right, and it will be firing lasers. Like, you don't have to say, hey, I want it on this axis doing this. Like, you type in the most basic way possible, and it will translate that into code and make it go.
I imagine we're gonna have a lot of unsecure apps. I don't think this AI or whatever it is that's gonna be writing the code based on what I tell it to do is gonna understand proper secure coding. And let's say it understands 80% of it. It still might understand 20 or 90%, 10%. I don't Secure coding is very complicated for most that even understand coding or development, right? So I don't know if a machine's going to know how to understand how to develop something that doesn't have vulnerabilities built into the code by default.
So it really, gosh, I'm looking at this particular product in like three different ways. So first of all, Nick, I totally buy that it's possible that this an AI writing code might not be secure. I also see it very possible that it's the exact opposite. And like whatever this AI has been trained on secure code. I would assume that like some sort of like hard coded like ability to make sure vulnerabilities don't exist according to like, rules posted by code security vendors like SonarCube or whatever. Like I would think that maybe this AI was trained or has some sort of hard coded ability to keep stuff like that from happening. At the same time, you're opening up a can of worms to a lot of different people who have no business. Well, not no business. Anyone can do it if they want, but like I just don't know if I'd like take like somebody who talked a project management software into existence. I don't know if I'd want to use that project management software. This kind of actually just kind of strikes me as a framework. Like it's maybe not a good comparison, but like to me, talking to a machine that puts out your code is kind of the same as like potentially using something like Ruby on Rails or Django or another framework where you're just using the conventions of the framework and the code that's actually doing the work is, pre-formatted, quote unquote secured if they did a good job, and it's just a framework. And I love frameworks personally, which makes me think, "Oh, I could totally like this." I just don't know if that this obviously it's still experimental and everything, so I don't really know if I should compare the two, like a fully vetted framework versus this. But that could be how it's fleshed out if they do it, quote unquote properly. So that might be an angle, I guess.
So one thing I want to touch back on was that you were saying how this AI might, or you could see it potentially developing like secure code based on these vendors. The thing that you still have to think about that though, or is consider there is that it's still been trained by a human, or it's still been shown what bad code might look like. I mean, so it's gonna have I'd imagine it's signature based, or it knows not to use like string copy, let's say. That doesn't, I mean, in my opinion, that doesn't mean that it's still not going to miss like a handful of other vulnerabilities, right? So I can see where you're going now. We're talking like if there's true AI that learns and can develop its own way to determine if like it could fuzz its own program, right? Like if it's sitting there and it's fuzzing its application as it builds it, then that'd be awesome. But I think you're gonna have a lot of people that want to make games and apps, and they're just gonna tell something how to make it, and then those things are just gonna be full of holes. Just because another human's like designed this product, and they've designed it to code the way that they envisioned, right? They didn't design it to. I mean, maybe best practices are in use, but I mean, do you understand what I'm trying to say here? I guess.
No, I mean I totally get it. I maybe just which is out of character for me, but I might just be optimistic.
All right.
in this particular case for some reason, or I'm taking the optimistic devil's advocate viewpoint. In my head, theoretically, I could see it going both ways. I could see it being a total nightmare, like when you tried to let Reddit, program an AI, versus like if they're actually careful and do it methodically and well. Yeah. I guess this is kind of another maybe angle to look at this from is like this is just no code. The no code movement is like one of those things that's growing where it's essentially like Google Forms on steroids, where you click and drag stuff into an interface, you tell it what to do, and like supposedly it's secure in the background, right? This is just like another version of the no code movement where you're doing something that you understand just innately as a human who understands like English and like a couple things, and converting and letting a computer convert that into logic on the back end. You can still make terrible apps that have significant vulnerabilities, but also there are some vulnerabilities that you can't code in that way. Like you're not going to use string copy, for example. So it's just kind of, I don't know. I'm being more optimistic today. Maybe I woke up on the right side of the bed, but yeah.
So I think keeping the fact that this is so new, right? For me, and this could be a bad comparison, but I'm going to compare it to just voice to text. Like it's already using voice to text. Let's just talk about like voice to text. If you asked me to dictate a paper that I needed to actually give to another human, and you told me I could not touch the text that voice to text generated, like 10 years ago, I would not have accepted that, because I know that when I went to say IP address, it would have written like the word I and then like the vegetable P. But like we've progressed to the point where I would feel comfortable probably just dictating something voice to text and not doing really any editing. And that's because of the maturity of the technology, right? So in this case, I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. I don't think this is ready for prime time. I don't think this is going to be sent to people and they're going to make bad apps. And I think that for a few reasons. Let's say it could generate a whole bunch of languages today. I think right now it's limited to JavaScript. But let's say it could do, Kotlin, Swift, whatever you're going to do for your mobile apps. Somebody with no technical knowledge is still not going to be savvy enough to just explain a program, but then figure out how to sign up for an Apple development license published to the App Store. So I'm not worried about like bad apps running rampant. I think the initial use for this probably is basically like code completion on steroids for developers, right? Like I wouldn't mind an AI generated snippet if I could give it a description of what I'm trying to accomplish with a function I'm working on. Like take an input text string and shift every letter, 2 to the left, mod 26. Like if it can do something like that, I can probably use it to augment my workflow in like the state that it starts out at. And then over years of use and integration and maturity, I think we reach the point where I'm optimistic like Ryan, where it's not bad that we do abstraction or that we introduce new tools that make things easier. But, as we've seen with the convergence talk before, this will almost assuredly, as this develops more and as no code continues to develop, we'll have a whole bunch of people who say they are developers and by all rights are developers. But things like debugging programs or, working through really hairy problems may not be expected of like developers in the future, because that's actually a different skill set once no code kind of goes full maturity. Now, to catch that though, we already have good software. If we get better continuous integration testing tools, if we get better fuzzing tools, if GitHub and other code repos continue to proactively let us know about vulnerable libraries, then like maybe we build technology that actually even automates those more difficult areas more for us. But again, we get further away from people who have like the pure knowledge, and we're just enabling greater productivity, which isn't a bad thing, but that's how I view it.
So I find it curious that you think it's that hard to put an app on a network. I mean, I know people that have no idea what they're doing technology wise, and they've Googled and they're like, "Oh yeah, I built this app," and I'm like, "Oh God." I think it's a lot easier to honestly put like those apps out there, and that's why I thought about the rampant apps, right? Maybe not like apps in the sense that we're talking about. Because you said the only language right now is what, Java?
JavaScript, I think.
Oh, JavaScript. So we're looking at web.
Yep.
All right. I'd like to see. I would like to see where it goes as a project. Making productivity easier is always going to be the objective. I mean, let's look at us. We're all lazy, right? We all know that. We like to automate. We'll code something that takes us 10 steps. And if this makes it easier, then I like that. I'm just still worried about how it's coding, I guess. I'm going to always feel that way until I see solid coding even come from people designing, like people that say they have secure coding backgrounds.
Yeah, I actually kind of want to hit back again on what Jeff said too in terms of like the productivity and stuff. I can't remember. There was a podcast I listened to like a year ago, and I'll never find it again, about like a guy who broke both of his hands or something, and he was a developer, and so like he had to continue doing his job, right? Because he had to make money so he could eat, and he actually like downloaded like a couple pieces of software. One was like a webcam kind of thing that would watch his eyes, so he could like click on different parts of his screen with his eyes, and the other one was like this voice, this speech, dictation software or whatever. He was talking about how he like kind of made it work, but like something like this, right? You're talking about enabling like a whole new class of people who like either maybe like can't type right now because they broke both their hands, or never could type because they were born with like one hand or something like that. So like that's a very interesting use case for this, just in terms of like enabling people who like are developers already, right? They're definitely smart, and like they're smart enough. They should be. Not that anyone probably isn't smart enough to be a developer, but like they have that mindset. They know like what they're doing. It's just they can't use a keyboard for whatever reason. So like accessibility wise, I think this is pretty exciting too, which I didn't think about even until Jeff was talking about like productivity and like the idea that like like, oh, I want to write this particular line of code, but I just don't want to type it for some reason. Or like I have this concept in my head and I need like a starting point or boilerplate to work off of. Yeah, even if it doesn't like reach a wider audience, or like they price it, which I'm sure they will eventually, in a way that like only a major company with like a large development team could pay for it, that might be a way to control the security of it by, quote unquote, putting it in like the best people's hands, whatever that means. So this might be like a two different conversations. One, on the one hand, you're just talking about productivity, accessibility, and just like enabling your people to be better, which is essentially, I guess, good for business. And the other half is like the democratization of code, which is like something that has been kind of in the news, I guess, for the last decade-ish or so, where it's like, hey, learn to code. Like if you remember that, like that whole thing that was going on for a while when somebody in the government basically told everyone to stop going into coal mines and learn how to code instead, which was like a huge thing. But like the learn to code movement, right, is huge. And so like, should we be democratizing code across the world, because that is kind of the world we're all living in now, is like the digital one versus the real world where you're going into coal mines or whatever instead? It might be two different conversations. I'm not sure.
It's kind of funny, like you guys immediately like went into your train of thought with this, and my train of thought was we're just going to see a lot more, even more than we do now, like shovelware in like mobile app stores. Because
you're probably right. The simplest solution. We're overcomplicating it probably, but yeah, like you're right. How many more Clash of Clans do you think are going to pop up now? Because you can just speak the art into existence, I guess. I don't know.
What about like maliciously using this, like purposely flooding markets to plug things up, or any other way to use that bad instead of in a good way?
To be fair, I don't think this, like as Ryan stated, and as Nick also like stated, like Ryan said, this is a framework. It is like there's nothing stopping people from just copying code already. And as Nick said, like there are plenty of people who just Google how to make something and then make really bad software. So I wouldn't worry about this personally as like a we're gonna have so much more bad software, because like at the end of the day, that problem to me, as far as like spam, like that becomes a problem for the people providing you the spam, right? So Apple like already has an iOS, like let's just go at mobile, iOS app approval process, and Google already has Play Store review processes. So if they see a sudden uptick in spam that ends up temporarily hurting users, which is bad for the user, they will, based off business motivations, improve their processes, and actually potentially this could actually help improve the quality of apps, because they will get better at actually eliminating spam, and they haven't been forced to yet because we haven't hit some sort of threshold event. So that's my like take on all that. I could be way off, but yeah, I feel like we've shown time and time again as like an industry and as like just a species that normally, especially when business interests are involved, once something becomes annoying enough, the responsible party, so to speak, will step in and make things
totally
better.
Agree. Yeah, I mean, if there was going to be spam, and in a lot of ways there already is, I'm not sure this is a force multiplier for attackers necessarily.
No, I don't see it being that way for a long time until it becomes like an enterprise level. Like this is how we code our apps, right? Or this is how we code our products. I don't see it being an issue.
And this kind of gives me an idea too of like, imagine like if, and we were kind of talking about this before, like imagine if Azure had like voice dictation admin of like your enterprise, right? Like I want you to search, I want you to search for users who haven't logged in for 6 months and give me a report in this format. Like, how cool would that be? Somebody do that.
That would be legit, but what happens when they do it to configuration and you just have some admin
Right.
just talk? I don't know. I guess I'm not old school, but I feel like I'm being old school right now where I'm like, hold on, this new technology, hold on, guys. Like I feel that, but like I feel like you'd have a lazy admin like, yeah, let's just make this guy and put him in these groups. Well, what groups? Like,
For
you know what those
sure.
groups
Yeah,
were?
no, I
Like,
mean, it could
I
be
don't know.
total nightmare and chaos. Absolutely. But it's also very interesting to think about, like, an admin sitting down at AWS and being like, I need to provision 1,000 servers. Go. And it's just happening. Which you can do with scripts right now, but why do I need to write? I can just talk.
I mean, at the end of the day, this is just another technology, right? Technology is neither inherently good or bad. Like that, I firmly believe that. People will use it for good and people will use it for bad. And I don't think it's the technology's fault that it's making coding more accessible.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just trying to think of ways in which it could be leveraged more so than whether or not it actually will be.
I'm always thinking maliciously, Jeff. That's
Nick's
all I can
a
think
bad
about.
person, and that's it. Yeah.
Horrible.
All right. Yeah, we can wrap that topic, I think. Igor, you got some more for us?